The 70s threw up some of the greatest live albums of all time. All the World's a Stage from Rush, Deep Purple's Made in Japan, Thin Lizzy's Live and Dangerous, and Led Zeppelin's The Song Remains the Same are just some of the unforgettable classics from a great decade for live albums. These are the towering landmarks of the rock landscape, but often overlooked in that cherished list of classics is an album which arguably outshone many of its more famous counterparts. That album is Strangers in the Night by UFO.
If I'm gonna go out and buy a live rock and roll album, I want to hear some rock and roll, and I want to hear people pushing the envelope.
For some musicians, it's being in the studio is the big thing. That's the creative buzz of making the music. But no, for UFO, it was getting out on the stage and just playing all these wonderful songs one after another.
To me, there are only two live albums. It's Live and Dangerous by Thin Lizzy and Strangers in the Night by UFO, and that's what we played.
I just remember the sleeve when it was on vinyl. The sleeve was great. All their sleeves were great. It looked great in your record collection, and it sounded great in your record collection as well.
We were music fanatics, women fanatics, drug fanatics. Yeah, we took the party to the venue, and to the dressing room, to the hotel, and to the waking up in the morning to a line of coke, But then we grew into this whole thing grew into a culture that gave us an ability to write songs with a certain style of
There are stories in history about why bands didn't make it in America, and I think theirs is probably one of the unluckiest because they got really close and it should have been bigger than it was.
People hear the stories now about Pete Way and Michael Schenker especially. There is a tendency to think they're a bit lost, and all you have to say is, well, listen to this record, because this proves what they were capable of. This proves how good they were and how much they deserve the influence and impact that they've had over the years.
A classic band, a wonderful band, and long may they reign.
In the UK and the USA continued to elude UFO. The band effectively became exiles and were even perceived as a German band.
They were on the outside, they weren't. They weren't for general consumption. They were slightly aside from the mainstream.
I think when they started off, I think the beginning, the market was changing and there was a lot of movement in the disco thing, really, if there's truth be known. In that era, when UFO started off, the bands that were established, like the Zeps and the Purples and all that, they had already been established. They were coming in as a second wave, but as they started, bands like Earth, Wind and Fire and the real disco thing started to kick in. So they weren't at the end of it, but they were coming around the side of it. So they had to do a lot of work.
Undeterred by their lack of major success in their own country, the band limped on into 1973 when Mick Bolton missed a series of German dates and had to make way for German Wunderkind, Michael Schenker.
Michael Schenker, 16 years old, he looks the part, especially in those days. Long blonde hair, he dressed the way that a rock star should. And of course, he had the flying V and played like an angel. The fact that he occasionally acted like a devil was something else.
The guy is still an amazing guitar player, and he's also an absolute fruitcake.
I think he was that lunatic fringe thing that really makes everything work. There was always the juxtaposition between him, Phil Mogg, and him. They were always sort of fighting for supremacy. It's like Eddie Van Halen and David Lee Roth. That's what made that band work. But by doing that, they pushed each other. One tried to do the other, and that was really good for the band. It's healthy.
As soon as Michael joined the band, everything sort of fell into place, and it became a hard rocking, tough sounding but musically interesting rock and roll band.
Michael brought in a lot, actually, obviously, because of his guitar talent, and I think what it was, we were an open canvas. So, you know, the style we had and our ability, myself and Andy Parker, to play a certain feel, which sat behind Michael's guitar, and it left it open canvas to write, you know. It wasn't like, oh, let's play this and that, and playing what other people did. This is a time when we started to play what we did, and it expanded the whole thing. We became a completely new unit.
Phenomenon, the first album with Schenker, did prove a major step forward. And from this point on, UFO began to grow its audience both in the UK and the enormous American market.
Suddenly they'd found their feet. They were beginning to write well together. They'd signed a deal with Chrysalis Records.
Chrysalis put the UFO with a man called Leo Lyons, who was in 10 Years After on bass, and starting to make a reputation for himself as producer. And their first album together was Phenomenon, which really set the seal and set the mark with songs like Rock Bottom and Doctor Doctor, which to this day are UFO classics. It's still the occasional hark back to the old days with a song called Space Child.
Good piece of work, and it critically very well acclaimed. Whether it was the actual trick in the tail they were looking for, I'm not sure.
For them, that was pretty much a landmark album, but for me, it certainly wasn't a phenomenon.
People who were into UFO probably weren't expecting suddenly, you know, the band to sort of deliver this new sort of streamlined hard rock approach from that odd sort of space rock sound. It's the start of classic period UFO.
We were losing so much money actually to him because we were opening and playing special guests, but the album goes and like actually bangs straight in the charts, like wow. And when we're doing something right, we're almost spearheading a different type of style. We're taking hard rock, well played, which is where your Van Halen's came from.
The next album with Michael Schenker was Force It. And this was an even better offering than Phenomenon. It produced 5 of the tracks, which would ultimately feature on the classic live album. And included among them was the magnificent album opener, Let It Roll.
We had that thing of we're playing bigger sounding stuff, you know, and we were slightly aware of where we wanted to go with the songs, you know, the bigger sort of backing stuff, leaving stuff open for Michael to solo, and the songs were pretty well constructed.
From everything, from the cover, from that great cover, right through to the record itself, it was just close to being the classic UFO album. I always thought it was the best record. I thought they'd been on the road long enough. They sounded exciting in the studio. They sounded as though they were on it. There wasn't too much drink involved. They had lots of potential. I think that was the one album for me that should have been more than phenomenal. That's the one for me that should have been the great record.
I think that album cemented what had started with Phenomenon. They added Paul Chapman on second guitar, and I think that sort of worked quite well for them because it was during that period of 1975 when dual guitar sounds were quite an important thing.
The problem was that Michael Schenker didn't really want to play with another guitarist, albeit someone as good as Paul Chapman and albeit someone who probably could complement him. He didn't like it. So beefing up the sound with a guitarist didn't work. So the next thing they did was think keyboards.
Keyboards, now there's the thing. In a rock band, they tend to, in the wrong hands, they can kind of smooth things out and make them a little bit AOR.
I just wanted the band to continue to be heavy. I love the heavier side of things, you know. And there's very few bands like that. As soon as they put keyboards in, it tends to weaken it, you know. Thin Lizzy, for instance, should never have had keyboards, you know.
But theirs was the kind of hard rock sound that needed keyboards just to fill it out. And keyboards have always been used really as a sort of as an instrument to enhance the overall sound of the band, rather than as a sort of an individual instrument in its own right.
The band finally made it to the first division and were now in demand for television appearances such as this 1975 appearance from the US.
People saw us on a couple of TV shows and went, wow, who's that? Which made Fawcett sell.
Once Fawcett had shown that UFO had a direction, the next thing they did was decide, okay, we need a keyboard player. Chick Shelton did the sessions on Fawcett purely for studio work. He wasn't going to go and tour with them. And they brought in a guy called Danny Perrinell, who was with the Heavy Metal Kids at the time. And the one and only album they did with Danny was No Heavy Petting, which to be honest was a little bit of a disappointment.
They'd already established, you know, the success that they'd already had was there. They had the audience out there. So this was a hiccup, really, more than anything else. Maybe it was just a bit, maybe they were a little burnt out. I don't know, but you know, that can happen with a lot of bands.
When they did Phenomenon and Fawcett, it was beginning to work, and I think they feel they did want to change the formula. I think that's a good idea, really, if you're getting somewhere.
It sold very well in the States. It was up there with Fawcett, you know, in sales, because I think they were touring a lot in the States then anyway. So it may have been a, you know, stopgap, you know, to fill out the contractual obligations, but it's a good record. There's some great tracks on there.
After No Heavy Petting, UFO made two very important decisions. One was to ditch Danny Perrinell, who was a decent keyboard player, no question about it, but not the right sort of keyboard player for where UFO were going with their melodic hard rock. So they brought in Paul Raymond, who'd been with Savoy Brown.
Danny Perrinell was a great keyboard player and great singer, but we realised that we couldn't have keyboards on everything. It was softening the sound. And we wanted to keep the power chords going. Well, with Paul Raymond, he played guitar, but he also played keyboards, and it was like, yeah, that's what we need. So hence that added that dimension that you can have the keyboards, and you've got the rhythm guitar under Michael's solos, which, you know, to be truthful, with me and Andy, we're keeping this sort of simple power sound, and Paul came along and layered it. It was great.
The second move they made was to bring in Ron Nevison as producer. Now, Ron Nevison had experience working with Led Zeppelin and bands of that ilk, and he allowed the sound and brought the sound to a new level. He gave it a modern edge.
I think the production on Phenomenon, Fawcett and No Heavy Petting was fine, but it was a bit lackluster. It wasn't really on the money for an even wider audience that they felt they could reach.
A lot of rock and roll bands who are in the slightly progressive rock arena can be sometimes self-indulgent, and you know, on the record they say, well, in this section we can go through a huge, you know, bit of like harmony guitars and harmony keyboards in, and then we'll have, you know, this bit and it goes into the drum solo, and then, you know, the Ron Nevisons of this will say, well, that's great, you do that live, but here we're going to hone it down, we're going to make it concise, we're going to make it, you know, radio friendly, and I think that's what Ron Nevison was able to do for UFO.
And I think they had a good relationship with a Big Ron, as he was known. They never really elaborated too much to me at the time, you know. But I think they look back on him with affection, you know.
Love Ron. He'd tell you off. He'd go like, have you lost your ability to count to 4? He terrorised me, you know, but he was, yeah, he was great, genius. Ron brought in that class of engineering, you know, and plus I wouldn't say he taught us to songwrite, but he taught us to capitalise on the strengths of our songs. And he also got the best out of Michael Schenker, which is so important.
It's very hard, and it must be very hard, to be in the studio with someone like Michael Schenker, who is incredibly temperamental, has a very fragile personality, and was very young at the time. By the time they came to the first Ron Nevison album, Lights Out, he was still in his teens. He was still really young. So dealing with someone like Michael Schenker in the studio could not have been an easy task at all. And I think Ron Nevison's stature is shown in the work he got out of Michael Schenker through not just Lights Out but also Obsession, with songs like Lights Out itself, Too Hot to Handle. These are classics, and it really says a lot for Ron Nevison's ability as a producer that Michael Schenker did produce such stellar performances, which studio-wise are better than anything he did with Leo Lyons on the 3 previous albums.
Obsession was to be the last studio album with Michael Schenker. Well, first time round anyway.
I don't know Michael personally. Our paths have crossed on a couple of occasions and just said hello, but I don't really know the guy. But if you are to believe all the accounts, he's pretty much out there, isn't he? And difficult to deal with.
Michael Schenker is a very fragile personality, was then, is now. A brilliant musician, a genius, a guitar god, if you want, how we want to describe it. But he came with a lot of mental baggage. He always had difficulty personality-wise, and dealing with the way that UFO were, the way that Pete Way and Phil Mogg especially could be wind-up merchants to the max, he couldn't deal with it.
At the time, you'd say we travelled a lot. I mean, you know, you do like 1.5 years non-stop on the road. You know, it gets to you, you know, you're doing coke, loads of it, you know, that sort of thing. But you get to a point, you're on a plane with somebody every day, in hotels every day, and yeah, me and Phil can be a bit wearing. But you know, Michael's the way Michael is. Michael's a sensitive artist. You know, so unfortunately I wish Michael wasn't quite so sensitive, because I think it would help him, you know, but people are people.
It's not difficult to see why the poor bloke was under so much pressure, but you know, there's also a feeling that Michael's really never done himself any favours when he's ever been in any situation like that. So
I think Schenker was turned into a bit of a sulker. I think he liked his own way a lot of the time. I think he was so special, such an important member of UFO, that maybe he was allowed too much leeway every now and again. You know, maybe the managers at the time should have, you know, crack the whip a bit more. I don't know. I suppose you have to be careful. If you treat people with kid gloves all the time, it's not going to work. And I think they tried that approach with him to try and keep him happy and make him feel comfortable. But he blamed the band for getting into a drink problem, because he apparently suffered from terrible stage fright. So he used to drink to overcome that. And one of Phil Mogg's famous comments was, every night they would drive past these notorious nightclubs in LA and Schenker's car was parked there, and he was no angel himself.
I think it was an unreliability in the fact that the substances started to take a grip, and I think that the band started to get fed up with it, because no matter how whatever the band were doing, they were a live act, and the rest of the band, I know, were really into touring and touring well. So I think they just didn't want to go on the road and not know whether he was going to turn up, whether he was going to be in a state to play. I think it all became a little bit hairy. So I think really, in the end, it was just a parting of the ways with the other four and him.
So Schenker's swan song would be the live album, and what a truly rockingly magnificent album it was to be. And one of the early highlights on the first side of the album is Out in the Street, an out-and-out rocker which showed just how hot the band were on that night. The long-term rhythm section of Way and Parker were really firing on all cylinders.
I don't think either of them are particularly outstanding, but as a unit, they are. And that's the magic for a rock band, is that the bass player and drummer are locked into one another, and they certainly are.
There was a magic between them. I don't know what it is, but you hear what they do together and so it works. It's the thing with UFO, everything should go wrong, but somehow things stumble out, and you listen to what they stumbled out with and you think it's far better than most bands who are better musicians could even hope to get close to.
They tended to play the song, which some rhythm sections don't do. They're in their own world. They played the song. That's quite obvious when, especially on Strangers in the Night, you hear them playing away. You can hear it's been well thought out. The other thing I like about them is they're funky as well. So they're playing the big licks when it's required. They're playing the song when it's required. And you know, when it requires a little skip and a swing to the beat, it's there. And I think that if they'd had more of a stodgy rhythm section, I don't think, you know, Phil's vocals or Michael's, you know, guitar playing being essentially the two sort of lead instruments would have worked quite so well.
You know, you have a drummer that's happy to keep the power, and also he plays the song, but it's kept simple. Well, we kept this power thing so that we didn't disrupt Michael's solo. Michael could build over the top of it. And Paul Raymond was adding the extra, you know, the sort of drive on the rhythms. And that, even though back in the early days, we kind of did it with just the four of us, you know.
That style they had, sort of a boogie rhythm from Parker, and a driving bass line, like a dum-da-dum-da-dum sort of feel. Iron Maiden adopted. All the new wave heavy metal bands adopted that Pete Way, Parker style rhythm section. So they were quite influential.
As a punter watching the band, I mean, it was always like Pete would be running around like crazy. He was the visual part of it. So Schenker could just stand there and Moggy moves around a bit, but Pete, you know, you couldn't nail him down. The guy was off, you know, and still he's just absolutely mad for it, you know.
For many critics, the album really comes to life with the next track, Only You Can Rock Me. It's here that Phil Mogg's vocal really begins to excel.
Phil was very inspirational because he never took second best. He'd always go, come on, it's going to be better. You know. To this day I get told off by Phil.
He has that sort of particularly British thing, which is his voice has got just the right amount of grit and soul in it. And he doesn't scream like an awful lot of metal band singers do.
His voice, the sound of his voice, and his interpretation as a singer is exceptional. I think he never ever got the recognition he deserved. To me, it's like symptomatic of the band, really. They really deserved to do better, but Phil was a great frontman. He had great vocal range. He wrote great lyrics, so he's got a really good sound to his voice.
He's distinctive. You know it's him straight away. He's not, you know, the classic rock voice. He's got his own individual style. I think because, you know, it's a band of nutters, and him being one of the nutters, perhaps they don't get taken as seriously musically as they ought to.
He's a character, just like Pete Way, and you know, and relies on his vocals to convey that character. Because, like I say, you don't get much running around and jumping about. And, you know, he's no John Bon Jovi when it comes to stagecraft, but my God, he can sing the pants off the Bon Jovi boy.
I often think that people like Bon Scott from AC/DC adopted his manner on stage. He had this great presence, just stood there. He was a real clown as well, apparently, on the road. One of my favourite stories was when he was on tour with Rush, and Rush used to have dry ice at the start of Phil Mogg's gag every night was to get from one side of the stage to the other without being seen in the dry ice. So Rush are doing this wonderful starry and moody, and there's Phil Mogg crawling through the... And apparently one night, he pops his head up in the middle and have a look around. So he's a real character.
The original vinyl album closed side one with a stonking classic in the form of Doctor Doctor.
Doctor Doctor is probably the best song UFO ever came up with. They've got a great melody line, they've got a great chorus, and they've got, you know, blistering guitar work from Michael Schenker. That's what makes a good UFO song.
Doctor, doctor, please, can't you see the mess I'm in? Doctor, doctor, please, can't you see the mess I'm in?
Came about a simple riff Michael had. I mean, isn't it ironical there's no lead solo on it? It's just a harmony, guitar harmony. You know, of a band with a guitar player of Michael's stature, no, there's no lead solo.
When you hear Doctor Doctor, the way it's performed on Strangers in the Night, it does send shivers down your spine. It's a great song anyway, but it's a live song. In the same way that AC/DC's Whole Lot of Rosie is a fabulous studio track, but you listen to it on If You Want Blood, You Got It, and it comes alive. Same with Doctor Doctor. It's an anthem, and you can hear the crowd going crazy in the background. Works every time for UFO. But I think they captured one of the finest performances they could have ever given of Doctor Doctor on Strangers.
It's one of the great songs of all time. You know, everybody knows that song. But it's hard to say how they see it. You know, bands quite often detest their most successful songs.
When you play in a band, you think, oh God, we haven't been able to do this one again. But then when you play it live, like say, you actually forget about what you're playing because you're enjoying the reaction from the people in the audience, and that's, like I said, that is the difference, you know. And they will never not play it, I wouldn't have thought, you know.
Can't do a live show without doing it. It's one of the highlights of their recording career, and probably the one that should have been a massive hit. It was a hit around the world, it just should have been bigger. It's always the one that wherever they go they have to do, whatever they play they have to do. When they do a live album, it has to be on a live album. It's the track. I think it's one of the great songs they've done, and if they could have done more on that line, I'm sure they've tried, they'd have had a bit more success. I think it's a real UFO track. It's got everything about it. It's got the blues in it, it's got great vocals, it's got great rhythm, and it's got a great chorus without sort of selling out.
Side 2 opened with Mother Mary, which demonstrates the more melodic side of the band. This is a sprawling epic of a track with a great vocal from Moggs and some real power in that crashing riff.
Mother Mary's a very different song. It's a lot heavier, a lot harder, quite dark for a UFO song. Most of the UFO songs are quite up and quite sort of positive in their feel. Mother Mary is quite dark, and it felt like the whole band are playing that riff, you know, and it's driving along, and it's quite menacing in a way. So whether it fitted in or not is a tricky one, but it's a great song.
You know, Mother Mary's, it's more a showcase for Mogg's vocal style and phrasing. Perhaps it gives him a chance to sing in a slightly different style than belting out the likes of Dr. Doctor or Rock Bottom or Only You Can Rock Me.
It's when we moved into that thing of bit of Zeppelin, bit of Mountain, bit of, you know.
Mother Mary is one of those timeless UFO songs. If you put together the best of UFO, it would be Stranger Than the Night. Mother Mary is a song with a great sense of melody and also has a bit of oomph to it as well. And you listen to it on Strangers in the Night and it's the band performing it at their finest. It's as if the band understand the song and the song's grown from being on stage for so long and the band finally go with it. It's a mature song that's grown up and now really almost has its own momentum and own vibe. And the chorus stays in your mind because it is so laid back.
I think, Mother Mary, you know, they should have made a little bit more of the arrangement live. They could have made more of the arrangement live. They could have taken some of the sort of slightly more modern melodic section that I don't know who was responsible for writing that, but you don't see that necessarily in some of their other titles. So if it had been me being the band leader or the person that was sort of helping with the arrangements for a live show, I would have extended the song. It is a little short because it's going somewhere and then it finishes and you think, oh, why did it finish so quickly? Could have had more of that.
For many UFO fans, the real highlight of the album is the awesome Rock Bottom. This is the real clincher on side 3, which demonstrates just how good this band really
Rock Bottom is one of those you never tire to hear, and as soon as you hear the opening chords, you know what's coming.
Next to Smoke on the Water, one of those riffs that guitarists have to master, and they feel inadequate if they haven't quite got it right.
Well, it's a lead guitarist's song, you know. It's got the energy of it. When it started off, it's like, which is great. But at the same time, it goes in all those changes. It was quite unusual for a band to go through so many changes.
If you bought the studio albums, like Rock Bottom's 3.5 minute song, very short. When it came to live, it was a totally different ballgame. And what I enjoyed is that, you know, the song would go on for like 9, 10, 11 minutes, you know, because they would go with the moment. So if Schenker was going off on one, that Phil would just drag it out. He'd almost conduct the band, if you like.
So different intro, then a verse with a great rock and roll riff as well, and then a chorus, a classic rock and roll chorus, and that goes around a couple of times, and then you get to the middle section where it becomes half time. Which a lot of bands use, but they use it to particular effect. So you've got this very fast intro, very powerful verse and chorus, happens a couple of times, and then you hit the middle section where it's half time.
Darkness closing
Phil Mogg sings "Where Do We Go From Here," you actually feel that, actually, it's a very good question, isn't it, Phil?
And then it goes off, you know, into a completely new section, which is a workout for Michael Schenker, and it's not too long, you know, it doesn't bore the pants off you, it's just the right amount of time.
It's a great song. I mean, he really sings it well. I mean, I've seen UFO a few times and he always gets his gob round those songs like Doctor Doctor, Rock Bottom really well. But I think it's probably because everyone knows it and it's really quite exciting. I think that the band, when they wrote those songs, they knew. You know, when bands write those songs, they know instantly when those songs work. I think every band from the Beatles right through to Zeppelin, through to everyone will have those wins that the audience just really, it does it live, you know.
With UFO, you have to do it live. You know, it's one of those songs, if you don't do it, you get a hell of a lot of complaints, you know what I mean? It's like, I haven't seen you for 4 years and you didn't do Rock Bottom. I remember in 1975 I saw you do Rock Bottom, and then Michael did the blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean?
For a band that perhaps didn't quite get as much media attention at the time as, say, their peers like Thin Lizzy, I mean, UFO wrote some absolutely amazing rock songs. Rock Bottom's one of them. Rock Bottom, Lights Out, Only You Can Rock Me, Doctor Doctor, Natural Thing, Mother Mary. I mean, you know, the list just goes on, you know, and on. It's like, where did they keep on getting them from? They kept on sort of getting them, you know. Rock Bottom is just killer chorus, you know, it's sort of chorus Queen would have been proud to come up with.
As with all the songs on Strangers in the Night, the band were performing it at a real high in their career, a real peak of performance.
By side 4, the band were clearly on such a roll that there was just no stopping them. The last track is a really true classic end to the set. The mighty, mighty Shoot, Shoot.
it's a moment in time, obviously, and you can record all these gigs. I mean, even though we did our, you know, for me, Live in Tokyo and that, it's still not a patch on. It's just the atmosphere, everything was just right, I think, felt for that gig.
Obviously, we're at the height of their career from the point of view of things I think were going well. You know, they were selling records, the tour was sold out, the recording quality is excellent, and everybody plays really well, and they do sound like they're having a great deal of fun. And even though Michael, you know, was to depart soon after this, it sounds like at this point it was all going quite swimmingly well.
I don't think live albums have the kind of the same kudos today that they had back in the 70s, when the staple was the live double album, you know, and of which only Strangers in the Night is one of the finest examples. 4 sides of brilliant hard rock and great songs.
It's an album that's captured the very best and the very best side of UFO. And that's one reason. The second reason is it's a great collection of songs. It is the best of UFO. And you're hard pushed to think of anything that came later that could replace or displace anything on the record. So it stands alongside the likes of Live and Dangerous from Thin Lizzy, or Deep Purple Made in Japan as one of the all-time great live albums, or Quo on Stage, another one. These are double live albums that deserve to be double live because it really captures the very best of the band with all the balances, with all the peaks and the troughs, and the way that they could really present themselves in their finest light.
Usually when you get a live album, and there's lots of tracks on Strangers in the Night, you usually have a situation where there's a few duff tracks. Well, there isn't any duff tracks. They're all good tracks. And they're all played with great verve and gusto. And the sound quality, I believe there's no overdubs on it. It's fantastic.
And there's no frills about it. And it was a warts and all live album, which I think is important, because so often nowadays you get live album, it's all redone in the studio. They book 30 days in the studio to tart it up. And that apparently Schenker really upset him, because Nevison wouldn't let him go in and redo the solo of Rock Bottom, I think it was. And he just wanted to overdub a few bits, and he said, no, that's it, it's going out like that.
It was like at the end of it, I don't know, a year on the road, and that was ironically Chicago Amphitheatre. We were doing 2 nights there, huge place. Ironically enough, some of it was recorded in Louisville, actually, but most of it was initially done in Chicago. We did patch some of it up, but not very much, because the band were very tight then, but at the same time, you know, you're playing to a lot of people. With the way we did our show, it was very much a in-your-face sort of to the audience type show. So obviously there's going to be a few overdubs, but it's very real, very live.
Arguments will rage about, you know, whether it was recorded in the studio or, you know, but, you know, forget all that sort of thing and just listen to, you know, the album. And Strangers in the Night is up there with the likes of Live and Dangerous and If You Want Blood, as you know, these are the great live heavy rock, heavy metal albums of all time that, you know, and given the way that the industry's gone now, will never be bettered.